Attention, attention, action this day. It is the final day of our Operation Dynamo Dunkirk most important week in human history specials. James Holland, how are you this morning?
Yeah, I'm good. It's been a hell of a week, hasn't it?
It's been really good. I mean, it seems to have been going on longer than a week, but maybe that's lockdown.
Well, it has been going on 8 days, to be fair.
Well, yes, yeah, but you know what I mean. Like,
I know.
It feels present in my life in a major way. So we're going to do the events of June the 2nd, but I think we also then need to talk about what happens afterwards, what happens to the French army afterwards, the fighting on the Somme outside Paris, the hedgehogs. We need to talk about Churchill's continued diplomatic efforts long after the BEF.
Which actually are just absolutely incredible.
Yeah. We've talked about Saint-Valery before on the podcast, and
but we should touch on it. We put the dates in.
Definitely need to talk about it because after all, the forgotten people,
They were abandoned by Churchill. They were betrayed.
Yeah, they're forgotten,
blah, blah,
which
blah.
is why they had a TV programme made about them. Unlike all the other units that never had a TV programme made about them. I have an email to read. The Colonel got in touch. Ingram got in touch to pick us up.
He's
on
been listening, and he's got words to say.
Yeah, and he didn't. This email does not begin with loving the podcast. So he's getting.
So he's very lucky that you're reading it out, actually.
And he starts off by calling me Alistair, so I know I'm in trouble. Alistair, yesterday James gave a dramatic account of the counterattack on the evening of the 27th May by the 3rd Grenadiers to restore the situation at Comines. Now this. When he sent me this, he'd mentioned bits of this before, my father, but this is like this is incredible, right? Because what he's done is he's not just looked at the war diary of one unit, he's looked at the war diaries of around them, and so you get a bigger painted picture. So the attack was in effect a brigade counterattack by the Guards, 3 field companies of sappers in the infantry role, a company of 6 Black Watch and some light tanks led by Major Hawker and supported by an impressive artillery barrage controlled by an FOO of a medium regiment in a carrier fitted with a radio. The attack was organised by the brigade major of 143 Brigade, a sapper. I think he was called Hooper. The attack was necessary because 143 Brigade, made up of the 1st Battalion, the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry, regulars, and 2 TA battalions of Royal Warwicks, had been driven off the Comines Canal by masses of German infantry. The Ox and Bucks having been caught napping in the early morning. Ahem! ! They had been very rude about the Warwicks, who they said had run away. I think there was a very big cultural divide there, but they themselves pretty much did the same. If you read the war diary of the supporting field regiment, artillery field regiment, they were ordered to put an 18-pounder on the road between them and to shoot if any more Ox and Bucks or Warwicks came back along it. Perhaps not surprisingly, this is not mentioned in the Oxford and Bucks war diary. The Oxford and Bucks managed to get themselves together in time to garrison Warneton, where the vital bridge over the Lys was, where 3rd Division came through in the night. The counterattack caught the Germans napping, but it was tough going. Hawker and one of the sapper company commanders were killed. As they swept through one of the hamlets previously occupied by the Oxford Bucks, they found Sergeant Roby hanging on in a house with his platoon, hoping his regiment would counterattack and rescue him. He was not going to abandon the members of the platoon who were wounded. The Germans had not spotted him. Not surprisingly, he was later awarded the DCM. The RMO was awarded the MC for coming back and finding the Ox and Bucks wounded. In my view, 2 outstanding episodes and an otherwise shoddy performance for a regular battalion. There were some individuals who held off the enemy for a while. Tony Jeffson was one. He was giving an MC. He was killed in action in Germany in 1944, leading an attack. In 1945, Roby DCM was appointed RSM of the Bucks. Grandpa, sent from my iPad. So there we go. Fully filled in. But it's this mosaic of different units interacting. Everything's incredible, isn't it, James? I mean, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. And I do think there is it's something that I haven't done enough of, but I'm definitely going to for my Sherwood Rangers book, is look at the battalion war diaries of the surrounding units.
Yeah.
Because then you get that complete picture. And you start piecing together. Of course, there's always contradictions. I mean, I've come up against this time and time again, where you've got a diary, and I'm sat with some veteran, and he goes, "Oh no, I can tell you exactly what happened on that day. We hit this hill," and you sort of go, "But in the war diary, it says something completely different." He goes, "Well, I can't tell you because here's my diary written on that day." And sometimes you just, I had this quite a lot in the Sicily book as well, where you've got lots of different evidence about the same thing, and it's subtly contradictory. Yeah, and as a historian, you just got to take a view. You've got to take a line. But it'll be really interesting to do, and that has really come to the fore. And your dad's really kind of shown a light on that, so I owe Ingram a pint on that one.
Excellent. I mean, it is the Duke of Wellington, though, isn't it? When you go to a ball, everyone has a different version of that ball and all that. That's what he said, didn't he, about battle? Is it's like going to a ball. Everyone's got their own point of view, and they have no idea what's going on the other end of the dance hall, etc.
No, exactly that. Exactly that. Now, so we're on to Sunday, the 2nd of June, 1940.
So the evacuation is still in full flow, isn't it? Even though the rear guard are really beginning to wobble, aren't they? But by this point,
it's basically all over now. So it is. The Germans are, on that day. A tank does get within spitting distance of the port and the beach, and it is really, it's the final throes. There's now the weather is really good again on the 2nd. So daylight evacuations are once again suspended, and there are 5,000 British left and 30,000 French remaining at Dunkirk at this point. Dunkirk itself is absolutely shot to pieces. Yeah. And that's another of the sort of small historical criticisms of Dunkirk the film, because it's not. It's much too tidy in the film. Obviously they were filming in Dunkirk, the real Dunkirk, now in 2017 or 2018 or whatever it was they filmed it. But it was absolutely shattered. And it's really interesting, if you do go to Dunkirk, you can look at the main church near the main square right by the port, and you can still see shrapnel marks all over it and bullet holes and all the rest of it. And so go on.
I mean, the scene in Atonement when he gets to the beach at Dunkirk,
that's really good.
Is much more sort of like it, isn't it?
Well, I posted up on Twitter the other day a painting of Dunkirk, and sometimes these paintings, because they just, it's a bit like the Dennis Barnum sketches. I always kind of feel there's more life, there's more kind of sort of vitality to a painting than there is a sort of two-dimensional black and white monochrome photograph.
Well, because they're someone's considered observation, aren't they? They're a description as much as anything else.
And there's a number of paintings and sketches of Dunkirk and the evacuation, and it just looks absolutely fantastic. I mean, the smoke, the oil going off, planes plunging into the sea, trailing smoke, just absolute mayhem. And this sort of darkness. And I think one of the things that I thought they got really well about the red car scene in Atonement is the kind of, it felt oppressive, didn't it? People swinging around being drunk, glass everywhere, debris in the streets. I mean, electricity cables down across the roads, burnt out cars, trucks, smashed in windows, towns that houses in rubble. I mean, it is an absolute smashed, hammered, post-apocalyptic town by then. The smell, the kind of sort of smoke fragments in the, you can't have smoke fragments, but you know what I mean, the sort of grit and dust in the air all the time, kind of choking, making your throat feel dry, combined with the sort of the briny sea and the sand and all the rest of it. I mean, a really, really sort of hellish place to be. But at 5 o'clock that afternoon from Dover, 11 destroyers, 13 personnel ships, plus minesweepers, drifters and scoots all set sail from Dover for the final evacuation of the BEF.
God.
First troops go on board about 9 p.m. And at 11:30 p.m, Bill Tennant, our friend who comes over on the afternoon of the 27th of May, that Monday, the previous Monday, he'd been there 7 days, and General Alexander, they get in a little launch and they go down the entire length of the beach, calling out with a megaphone, going, anyone there, anyone there, and they have not a single reply. And at 11:30 they signal back to Dover, evacuation of the BEF complete, returning home.
Incredible.
There's then 2 more days of getting off the French, and they get most of them. So 24,309 lifted that day, of which only 5,000 are British.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
And the
so
rear
nearly
guard,
19,000 of the 30,000 French.
The rear guard are still there's a French rear guard at this point, isn't there? So
they're holding the town. So the perimeter as such has gone. But don't forget, it's not a question of just sort of snapping your fingers if you're German and getting to Dunkirk, because you've then got to wade across. You've got to move everything up. You've got to move across those flooded fields. You've got to repair bridges. There's a delay of 24, 36 hours just to get there. And there's fighting going on in the town, so that's what's holding them up. But it's the most extraordinary battle And it is amazing that the French do fight so well. On that,
Yeah.
When the chips are down and they're absolutely confronted with it and they're cornered, they really do it. So Operation Dynamite is finally over on the 3rd of June, and 338,226 men. That's a frick of a lot, of which as we were saying the other day, about over
10 times the amount predicted. Basically, on 35,000, maybe we'll get that out. It's a staggering achievement, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And on the 4th of June, which is a Tuesday, this is when Churchill addresses the House of Commons, and by this point, everything has changed because Halifax has been kicked into touch.
Yep.
There has been this amazing deliverance. There's this sigh of relief that most of the BEF have come back.
Yeah.
And there is this sense that they've got away with it.
Yeah.
The absolute kind of Armageddon of the previous Monday. 8 days on, it's sort of they're still absolutely up the creek, and they're staring into a very, very dark place.
Yeah.
But there is some succour here.
Yeah.
And Churchill does this speech, and this is where he says, we must be careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of victory. Wars are not won by evacuations. But then comes the next bit. Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of the Gestapo and all the odious apparatus of Nazi rule, we shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and the oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and with growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Oh my God, I love that speech. I mean, every time I read that, and I read that one about the sunlit uplands, which he gives on the 18th of June, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I mean, this is the moment, for me, that Churchill goes from being holding on with his fingers, absolutely struggling for his political life, to suddenly becoming the daddy. Yeah. This is the moment that he comes. This is his hour where he stands up and delivers that speech, and everyone is just utterly spellbound.
Yeah,
and his authority goes from here, right at the bottom, where it's been on sort of rung one of the ladder.
Well, he's been running on
the
empty.
previous Monday.
He's a stopgap. He's got disaster on his hands. He's not leader of the Conservative Party. He's been forced into coalition in order to become a Prime Minister. It's just bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news. And his position's precarious politically anyway.
Yep.
But
with the combination of the deliverance of Dunkirk and that speech, his authority is switched up to 11.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
And it's...
So...
I think it is a really, really big moment.
Yeah.
But at the same time, on the very same day, there are also cabinet discussions, of which Hastings Ismay, his military chief of staff, is there. Dill is there. Dowding is brought in. Dowding points out that they're losing 25 hurricanes a day, and that at the current rate, by the end of the month, there won't be any hurricanes left.
Yeah.
And Churchill is still wanting to send them on to France. And he still wants to send another 3 divisions out. And they agree that they'll send 2 immediately. The Canadian Division and the 52nd Lowland Division. And then Montgomery's 3rd Division will go back out under Brooke.
Yeah.
So, that is still being sorted out. On the 5th of June, the following day, that is where Field Marshal Erhard Milch flies over Dunkirk. And he is the number 2 at the Luftwaffe, and he is the guy.
Well, he's effectively the Luftwaffe, isn't he?
Oh
He's
my
in
God.
charge of the Luftwaffe. We've talked about Goering. We've talked about how focused on his job Goering is.
The only reason that the Luftwaffe really functions is because of Milch's extreme competence. And he flies over, and he sees lots of debris, and he sees lots of abandoned trucks, but he doesn't see a single British soldier. Yeah. And he says the only way we're going to beat Britain is if we just kick on right now. Forget France, they're beaten anyway. Let's just push straight on. And Goering goes, oh, no, we can't do that. We've got to finish the rest of France. You know, you're worrying too much. And Milk says to him, if we leave the British in peace for 4 weeks, it'll be too late. And Goering goes, I don't care. I've got some art to go and look at in Amsterdam.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm just leafing through this catalogue. Do you mind?
Yeah. He actually meets him on Asia, which is Goering's train, where he's probably painting his nails and putting on eyeliner or something. But that same day, that is when Case Red begins. So, I mean, one of the reasons why they don't go on to Britain, because the decision has already been made. It's already been made, I think, on the 24th of May.
Case Red,
they're going to go straight.
Rot is the battle to defeat France.
Yes.
Beyond the encirclement, beyond breaking through at Sedan, it's basically the battle to take Paris, and the French sort of line themselves up, don't they, in hedgehogs, in these sort of kind of in square, with battle group squares as a way of trying to hold the Germans up.
Yep.
And do actually inflict a great deal of pain and anguish on the Germans, actually, but are nevertheless defeated. And it is interesting because of course if they had gone after the British, I mean, it's all very well Milk saying that, but what actually can the Germans do about? I mean, he's right. Leave it for 4 weeks, but he's thinking it's the RAF are going to get their shit together. We've still the Navy. You know what I mean? What the Germans can effectively do about the UK at this point?
Well, the problem is it's not a lot, because you can't just, as we were saying the other day, you can't just sort of move all your Luftwaffe up to the Channel coast. It's not as simple as that. You know, it takes time. You've got to prepare it. And Bomber Command is still going over every single day, and Coastal Command, and they're bombing airfields, which means you've got to put on anti-aircraft defences all around the aircraft and blast pens and all the rest of it. And all that takes time. It's not something you can just snap your fingers. And as I was saying, you know, the decision to do Case Red immediately following the completion of Case Yellow, Operation Yellow, the northern bit, is made, I think, on the 24th of May, and that's Hitler's decision. He makes that decision. He goes, right, we will finish off before we turn on Britain. So, and again, it's all in motion. You know, the same day that Milk is saying to Goering, it's too late if you leave it 4 weeks. You can say that until you're blue in the face. It's too late. They've already gone down that path. I mean, it's also so. You know, there are still British units there. Forget the kind of the 3 divisions which are being sent to Brittany and to Normandy. Yeah, there is the 51st Highland Division. There's the 1st Armoured, and there is this conglomerate force which is effectively a 3rd division in line with the French. And the 51st Highland, the reason the 51st Highland Division is lost is because it's in line with the 9th Corps of the French 7th Army, which of course is why the British is called British 8th Army, because it's the last of the French armies. And in addition to that, there are still 6 bomber squadrons of the Advanced Air Striking Force operating out there in France. So what is very clear, and also it has to also be said, that Weygand's counterattack, which does take place on the 27th of May, back on the 27th of May, did also involve the 1st Armoured Division. They lose over 100 tanks that day. Completely forgotten. It's just totally airbrushed from history. And the problem is that by the 7th of June, it's absolutely clear that the 9th Division is in a line to the coast, running sort of roughly east-west. But Rommel's 7th Panzer is cutting in at an angle at 45 degrees and heading straight towards Le Havre and the coastline. And General Fortune, who is on the coastal bit, the left-hand flank of French 9 Corps, says to the French, we're going to get cut off here if we don't pull back now. Do I have your permission to pull back? And the French go, no, you do not. So he then has a decision. What does he do? Pull back and save himself, but dob in his French allies? Or do the decent thing and stick with them? So he sticks with them. So it's got nothing to do with Churchill kind of abandoning them, sacrificing them.
But also, Churchill is still continuing his diplomatic effort it's not even diplomatic, his allied effort with the French. He's still going backwards and forwards to Paris as this unfolds, isn't he?
Yes, he is,
or planning to at this stage. And because Falrot starts on when is it? 5th of June. So
5th of June.
So at the end of this, basically the end of this week, they crank up the attack to take Paris, and Churchill is still planning to go backwards as the French government flees Paris, because Paris is declared an open city on the 10th, isn't it? So the French government basically burn all the documents and bugger off.
Bugger off, yeah.
And Churchill's keeping tabs on that and is still going to go and see them. So even though, so this idea that anyone's being abandoned.
Well, the point is what everyone seems to forget is that if you're in an alliance, you are tied legally by the terms of that alliance to operate together. Part of the dreams is militarily you find you neither side should abandon the other, unless it's agreed. That's the deal. That is the alliance. So to do that, you are breaking the alliance. And Churchill feels, and I think absolutely rightly, that to break that alliance to save Britain's skin is A, diplomatically wrong, immoral, and perfidious. And just the wrong thing to do. Secondly, the longer France stays in the fight, the greater their chance of being prepared back in Britain. Whilst at the same time, of course, there is huge dangers of that, because if you could keep committing aircraft and stuff and men, then obviously the chances of them being lost are obviously greater. So it's a gamble. It's a sort of lesser of two evils. So on the 10th of June, Rommel does reach the coast, which means that 51st Highland Division, as General Fortune foresaw, are now trapped. So an evacuation plan comes to go and pick them up from St. Valery. But unfortunately, on the night of the 11th, 12th of June, unfortunately, there is a really, really dense fog off the coast, and they can't get in. They literally cannot get to St. Valery. And so at 8:15 the following morning, Fortune has no choice but to surrender most of the division.
And it's at St. Valery. To make it clear, I mean, Dunkirk is a port on a part of the coast where there's a great long strand. There's a beach. There's the mole that goes out. St. Valery is a harbour town, isn't it? So you've got to get in.
Cliffs and a wave platform, which means why you have to be very careful.
You've got to get in and out of it. It's not. It's not like send lots of little boats. I mean, and I know that little boats. You know what I mean? It's a completely different maritime proposition, getting people out of St. Valery to say Dunkirk. And the advantages of Dunkirk are not on offer at St. Valery. So if the weather is bad, you can't get in and out of the harbour. Whereas the low mist at Dunkirk, low cloud, stops nothing, because it's this great big wide open beach that runs for miles, as well as the mole.
Exactly. Meanwhile, while all that's going on the 11th of June, Churchill flies to France with Eden, who is now Secretary of State for War, Dill, who is the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, and Ismay, his military Chief of Staff, and then joined by Spears, who's his man in France, at Briare, which is Weygand's headquarters on the Loire, where they also meet with the Comité de Guerre, the French sort of war cabinet, effectively, which is now being run by, Reynaud is really, he's
hanging on by his fingernails.
He's hanging on by his fingernails, exactly that. I was doing the movements, but not hanging on the right word. So you can see this, but I was sort of. So this is
basically as high level a military powwow as you could have. This is the two chiefs of staff sets from the two allied powers getting together and saying, right, what do we do now?
Yeah, and what has been happening back in Britain is Dowding and Newell have been saying, listen, you really got to think twice about sending more air in and more divisions, and all the the chiefs of staff are saying sending over more divisions is that a good idea, and Churchill's going, no, we'll have this redoubt in Brittany and Normandy, and it'll be great, and we'll just keep it going. We'll create a new lines of Torres Vedras, and it shows that we're committed and all the rest. We've got to do this for our French allies, blah blah blah. And everyone else is sort of going, well, I think that's a real cock up, but okay, fine, you're the boss. And so what they're trying to do is go, we're still with you, we're still here, come on, keep going, don't give up the ghost yet. What else can we do? But by 1941 we can commit a further 20 divisions. And Weygand just looks at him and goes, 1941, we need them tomorrow, we need them today. Yeah. You have no idea, and they leave very, very depressed. And for once, Churchill's cast iron optimism and spirit seem to flag, and he turns to Ismay on the way back and says, "You do realise that in 3 months we could both be dead." And actually the story of Churchill's return, well,
I'll tell you what, join us after the break. It's a We Have Ways cliffhanger. How about that?
I'm still by my fingernails.
We've never done one of those before. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Now, James left us on a shocking cliffhanger there of Winston Churchill and Pug Ismay getting on an aircraft and returning from front. What happened next? Question of sport style.
It's interesting you asked this, Al, because the very same fog that has done for the 51st Highland Division very nearly does for Churchill and Ismay and Dillon, Eden, because they are taking off because they have to get back. And the weather is not good. And so the escort can't escort them. And everyone says, listen, this is not a good time. We should wait for the weather to clear. And Churchill goes, no, I must get back to London. And so they get in the plane. And as they're flying over, they see 2 Messerschmitt 109s below them. And obviously their transport plane is a lot slower than a Messerschmitt 109 and has no defence whatsoever. And fortunately, the 109 pilots don't look up.
See them. And they get underneath them like that.
Yep, and they're gone, and crisis over, and they touch back down, and they make it, and it's all fine.
We did talk the other day about how dangerous just flying is before you even involve ME 109s. Yep. Right, so the Germans have to prise open the Maginot Line as well, don't they? So there's this battle for Paris, so there's a battle for the Maginot Line. Yeah. All these offensives going on, concurrent with all this. So there's actually still quite a lot of fighting going on in France, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. There's 2 drives. So Case Red goes sort of it's fans outwards in opposite ways, if you see what I mean. So Guderian is still with Army Group A, and they sweep in behind the Maginot Line, sweeping this big arc down towards Switzerland.
Yeah.
And he gets there in kind of sort of next to no time at all. Yeah. And he says, I'm here in Switzerland. They go, surely you've got the wrong name. You must mean somewhere else. And he goes, no, I'm on the Swiss border. They're just going, holy smoke, how did you get there so quickly? While Army Group B, which now has Rommel's and Hoth's Panzer Group, is sweeping down towards Le Havre. So that's so they're kind of sort of fanning outwards in these 2 giant encirclements. Meanwhile, on the same day that the 51st Highland Division have to surrender, and Churchill is nearly possibly being shot down by a Messerschmitt, General Brooke lands with his first 2 divisions in Cherbourg.
2nd BEF. Now,
the 2nd BEF?
No one knows about the 2nd BEF. No one's even heard of it. And this leads to cycle and aerial, right? 2 operations, 2 stories from British military history that because again and again it ends in Dunkirk is what people think. And like that intemperate French diplomat the other day said, it ended then. No. You have the 2nd BF. Brooke takes people into Normandy. Yep. To try and create this redoubt. Yeah. Because after all, we've talked a lot. It comes up a lot on We Have Ways where Churchill's strategic sense and global overview is very much informs how he then conducts the war. And you can argue that because he's such a student of military history, very famous biography he wrote of his ancestor of another Churchill, of
John Churchill, first Duke of Marlborough.
Exactly, the Duke of Marlborough, and how And so he knows that the way the British have fought and won is with naval power. And again, we're right back to this thing that we keep coming back to this week. And then what you do is you use your naval power, which is completely superior to the enemy's. And not only do you use it to blockade, but you use it to send soldiers, to send troops to places where the enemy has no option but to fight you. And you do it, they're doing it right at the end of their supply chain, and you're doing it at the end of your naval supply chain, which is actually effectively shorter and quicker because it's not, for instance, in Portugal at the other end of the French supply chain through hostile Spain.
Yeah.
And so Churchill this is how Churchill's thinking. He's thinking imperially. He's thinking
lines of Torres Vedras.
Exactly.
The Brittany
and the thing
Redoubt.
is, which of course, then all this similarly reflects on the stuff we've talked about: British power and British essential might and ability to answer a global threat. Also, therefore informs British strategy, and also somewhat makes the idea of Britain being on its own and all that kind of anachronistic and ahistorical and irrelevant. And Churchill's thinking like that, which is so. Of course, there's a second BEF because that's what you do. You put soldiers down with your massive navy, and they hang on and get the enemy to commit to fighting you. But obviously, this doesn't last very long because
it doesn't last very long. But I mean, what is really interesting is
viable.
Meanwhile, the 1st Armoured Division is not caught up in that encirclement, nor the other conglomerate force. So they are pushing back towards into Brittany, sweeping round through Normandy down to Brittany for ports. So for this planned Brittany Redoubt.
Yeah.
As if the kind of hair-raising trip where they're nearly spotted by Messerschmitts isn't enough. On the 13th, he flies over again. This time to Tours.
Yeah, with the French
which
government.
Is where the Comité de Guerre now is. And at this point, Reynaud is pretty spent.
Yeah.
And he says, please, you've got to put all your weight behind the Americans getting the Americans in. If we can get the Americans in, then there's something. But, everyone's so defeatist here. Everyone's all for kind of, Pétain's already said it's time to throw in the towel. So is Weygand. One thing that Reynaud does do is he gives the British the permission to take over all the French-American orders, armaments orders, planes, tanks, all the rest of it, guns and stuff. Yeah. So that is one last thing he does. Following day, Paris falls, and that is when de Gaulle comes up with the unification plan.
Yeah.
So de Gaulle is about to fly out to Britain and leave. He's in the war cabinet, but he's the lone voice saying, we should fight on. Everyone else is against him. And he goes, well, what about this unification plan? And no one takes it seriously apart from Churchill and de Gaulle himself. And it's all over. And in the afternoon, Brooke says gets on a call to Churchill. Churchill gets back to London, no problem at all this time. Says, it's time to evacuate the BEF a second time. This is absolutely hopeless. And Churchill goes, no, you've got to do this. And Brooke just absolutely sticks to his guns. And they're on the phone for the best part of 40 minutes. Churchill pleading with Brooke. And Brooke is just going, no, it's over. We've got to get us out. And so eventually Churchill concedes the point, which is it's a very, very important conversation because it's one of those ones that directly leads to Brooke later becoming chief of the Imperial General Staff because he's one man who can stand up to Churchill. Anyway, long and short of it is a further 200,000 troops are lifted over the next 48 hours from Cherbourg, Saint-Nazaire, La Palisse, Brest.
Well, and then there's the sinking of the Lancastria famously, which is again, I mean, as all these Dunkirk postscripts, which are just as dramatic, but it's another couple of 100,000 soldiers though, isn't it? So we're talking, an army. An army's
well, if you add that to the 338,000 from Dunkirk in Operation Dynamo, and then you add that to the kind of 100,000, something like that were lifted from Calais and elsewhere beforehand, the useless Maus as they were called, service troops and stuff that were lifted earlier, you're getting on for sort of 600,000. That's a flipping hell of a lot.
Which is pretty good, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 70,000 get left behind.
Yeah.
Killed in action, wounded in action.
Taken prisoner.
Taken prisoner, yeah. 64,000 vehicles left behind.
Yes.
2,500 guns, 400,000 tons of stores. You know, it is a lot left behind, and you can't sort of sugarcoat that.
All of it immediately pressed into service by the here and
because they don't have enough of their own. But, you know, you keep taking a mick about my bloody car, but you know, there's a reason why the French are using them for the Gestapo. It's because they haven't got enough themselves. You know, and obviously the French make jolly good cars. But on the 16th of June, Reynaud rings up Churchill and says, "Please release us from the alliance commitment." And Churchill goes, "I'd love to, but I just can't."
Incredible.
You know, I can't let you do that. Which is another reason, of course, is why Halifax's ideas are so misguided. Back at the end of May. So then Reynaud does formally hand over those French contracts with the US, and then resigns. And at that point, it's all over. The next day, French ask for an armistice. 21st of June, the armistice terms are announced. 22nd of June, armistice is signed in the same railway carriage that the Germans signed the armistice back in 1918. And Hitler, there's that film of him doing his little hop and a skip and slapping his thigh. The bastard. But the terms are pretty brutal. I mean, the reparations are absolutely crippling. And you know, there is this sort of all the industry is handed over to the Germans. The food. I mean, France is the one major nation in Europe which has no rationing at this point, none at all. That's all half-inched. You know, the Germans just home in on France like locusts. The only thing that is not part of the armistice deal is the French fleet. The trouble is, if the Germans get hold of that, that is a big potential headache.
Well, as Mike Nyberg was saying, in America, it's a headache. The Americans are thinking, we can't have that happen, and obviously the Americans don't want. They've avoided the double whammy here of the British fleet as well, but the French fleet is in panic enough for the Americans, and obviously the British government takes pretty stringent action at Meza Kabir to make sure that problem is basically solved. I mean, the thing is, I mean, I think the thing that's really interesting is how long. You know, we've done a week. The week is incredibly important, but the rest of June, this sort of, you know, is a time when the British basically are preparing. The Air Force is still being prepared. Beaverbrook's taking effect, isn't he, in aircraft production?
Starts to in June. It really does in July. Yeah, so 496 new fighter planes, brand new fighter planes produced in July.
But this is all being laid down in June. So actually, what the Germans don't realise they've done is given the British considerable pause for breath, actually. And the fact that you've got another 200,000 people, including something like 20,000 Poles getting out from the French Atlantic ports. You know, it's actually, you know, again, it's this sort of glamour of Blitzkrieg, the beguiling victory of Fall Gelb and then the fall of Paris, and it is amazing, but it's also not the battle won by any stretch of the imagination, and that's the thing that Milch realises, but obviously there's nothing they can do about.
Well, there's sort of, you know, the Allies are constantly being kind of sort of wrapped over the knuckles for kind of letting Germans get away from Sicily, or for you know, a few hodgepodge of Germans getting away from the Falaise pocket in Normandy, and yet the Germans, I mean, you know, 600,000 Brits,
500,000 people get away.
Yeah, you know, plus all the others, as you're saying. I mean, you know, there's the famous scene in Casablanca where you know, Humphrey Bogart is waiting on the train as Paris is evacuating. You know, where's he going? He's going to French North Africa. Yeah, you know, he wasn't alone. Lots of them did that. Yeah, you know, it's
And Churchill, at this point, he hasn't made the decision yet, but there are tanks going to North Africa pretty soon, aren't there?
Yeah, and Hurricanes going straight away to Malta, because, of course, the one thing I haven't mentioned is that Mussolini has declared war on the 10th of June.
Yes, of course,
from
the 10th of June.
Palazzo Venezia. Yeah. You know, so they're now in the war. Malta is bombed on the 11th of June. Yeah. There's almost nothing there. There's the handful. There's the crate of gladiators, of which they've managed to get 4 in the air. Yeah. So it's not Faith Open Charity. It's Faith Open Charity and Bob.
But the Italians enter the war. They invade the south of France, and it goes really badly. So the sort of, it's rich with omen, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
Mussolini opportunistically thinks, right, okay, I want a piece of the action. I want to be at this table. So what are we going to do? We're going to invade the south of France, and the French army, like, oh no, you're not. that ain't happening. Even though France is beaten, they're not. They won't throw in the towel to the Italians. It's very interesting and sets the scene for what then happens in the Balkans and
Yes.
all that sort of thing. Where the Germans are like, oh god, we're going to have to come to the and in North Africa come to the rescue because the Italians aren't up to it effectively. So
Well, the problem for Mussolini is he's just kind of sort of, he is in a sort of difficult situation because the bottom line is that if he doesn't side with Germany, then Germany probably will go into Italy and just take it over.
Yeah.
And obviously he doesn't want that to happen. So it's kind of, which way do you go? So his calculation is that Britain is defeated and therefore he's got easy victories and he can just kind of sort of have this sort of, new Roman Empire in the Mediterranean and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And it obviously just goes horrifically wrong because actually they don't have enough modernity and even the Navy, which is the Italian Royal Navy, which is the most modern of all, it still doesn't have any radar on it or anything like this or RASDIC or stuff like that. So it's they don't have aircraft carriers. So they're way behind.
When's Taranto? Taranto raid isn't long.
Taranto is November 1940. Right, but the thing is that there is this golden opportunity to take Malta, which would have been a really good thing to do. And what they should have done is put all their eggs in one basket and just gone for Malta. Once you've got Malta, that gives you a really good base. But they don't. They just don't do it. And within a matter of, I think it's a matter of 2 weeks, the first hurricanes are going over. You have to remember, this is at a time where they're, Dowding is going, if you send any more hurricanes to France with stuff, but they're sending them over to Malta. So it's, and by the end of 1940, Malta is absolutely bristling with anti-aircraft guns, where it hadn't been in June 1940. So it's a golden opportunity missed. And of course, all the Italian commanders, the moment that Britain doesn't sue for peace and is still in the war, they all sort of go, this is a slightly tricky one. And Mussolini's going, go on, get into Egypt. Britain has got its handful, though. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's lots of problems. Turkey was supposed to join the war on Britain's side, but then reneges on that. There's sort of Arab insurrectionists in Palestine and in Iraq. So it's sort of ripe to be undermined. They've got a lot of problems on their hand. They do have to kind of build up defences on Malta. There's an awful lot of things to think about. America isn't in the war. But America hasn't got much of an armaments industry at that time.
But it's not the disaster it could have been. It's the thing.
It's not the disaster it could have been. And you have to think, okay, what are the positives here? The positives are we do have a global empire. We do have the world's largest navy. We do have access to around 80% of the world's merchant shipping, which means we can literally get anything.
And we effectively got most of our army out, and certainly its professional corps, which we're going to need to rebuild. I mean, to fight the immediate fires and then to rebuild for they don't know when, but 4 years later, a new BEF alongside the Americans comes in, and it's a completely different story.
Well, I mean, I've said it before, but I really think you can consider June 1940 as sort of ground zero, really.
Yeah.
It's the moment where the strategic earthquake has happened, and it is back to the drawing board. It's to the drawing board for the United States, it's to the drawing board for Britain. And out of this, all they've got to do in the summer of 1940 is hold on. Because if they can hold on and keep fighting, then they will win the battle of supplies. And suddenly, instead of lightning victories, it is a long attritional bloody war in which he who can supply and build the most will win. And that's what follows. And that's why the subsequent Battle of Britain is so important, of which more later. But it also, it is growing, it's Churchill's sort of growing authority that summer as well. And I think that's really interesting. And that, again, happens in June. So June is a really critical month. Chamberlain remains in the cabinet until he gets diagnosed with cancer later that summer. He's got bowel cancer. It's actually it's terminal, and he dies on the 9th of November, age 71. Yeah. Meanwhile, Halifax has been kicked out entirely. He's been sent across the Atlantic to become ambassador in Washington, and Churchill is able to do I mean, this is where I suppose the comparisons with Johnson are valid, because he's able to kind of sort of fill the cabinet and all the key ministerial roles with people that he wants and trusts and likes. I mean, that's Beaverbrook is part of that, bringing in Professor Lindemann as his sort of scientific advisor and all the rest of it. He gets the right people. Dill goes as well the following year and is replaced by Brooke. And is a change. I think it is. I just want to kind of read out.
Go on.
Churchill does this oratory at Chamberlain's funeral, and I think it's fair to say that history hasn't been kind to Chamberlain, but I think Chamberlain deserves a little bit more respect, to be perfectly honest. And what one has to remember over the Munich crisis is that kind of over 90% of the population were against going to war. And as a prime minister, you're just not going to go against that.
This is the thing: is everyone's into appeasement right up to the point where they're not. It's one of those.
Right.
It's one of those political watershed moments. Because everyone thinks it's like the Iraq War. You look at the polling from the Iraq War. Everyone thought it was a brilliant. That's an exaggeration, but the majority were in favour of the thing right up to the minute where they actually no, I never thought that was a good idea. And appeasement fits neatly into that public opinion category.
Yes.
Where everyone was really into it until actually. And again, we talked about it this week. It was Seb Cox who said this. Until March 39, when the Germans do renege on their promises and do invade Czechoslovakia, and suddenly everyone goes, "Oh, actually, hang on a minute, we're going to need to change tack here," and that's when appeasement dies, basically, because the situation has changed. But go on. So what does Churchill say at Chamberlain's funeral?
Yeah, so he does this address, and there's this one paragraph which I think is really worth reading out, and he says, "It fell to Neville Chamberlain in one of the supreme crises of the world to be contradicted by events, to be disappointed in his hopes, and to be deceived and cheated by a wicked man. But what were these hopes in which he was disappointed? What were these wishes in which he was frustrated? What was that faith that was abused? They were surely among the most noble and benevolent instincts of the human heart. The love of peace, the toil for peace, the strife for peace, the pursuit of peace, even at great peril, and certainly to the utter disdain of popularity or clamour. Whatever else history may or may not say about these terrible, tremendous years, we can be sure that Neville Chamberlain acted with perfect sincerity, according to his lights, and strove to the utmost of his capacity and authority, which were powerful, to save the world from the awful, devastating struggle in which we are now engaged. This alone will stand him in good stead as far as what is called the verdict of history is concerned." And it's a brilliant speech, and I just think he's absolutely bang on the money. Yeah. The tragedy for Chamberlain is that it hasn't held him in good stead.
Yeah. That
he's still vilified, and that he's portrayed as some sort of pathetic comic book villain in a major Hollywood movie about the period. And it's just wrong. It's just, he wasn't... he was the guy who sided with Churchill in those absolutely
critical moments.
He was the guy who decided to spend the Exchequer's money on backing the building of an RAF, an air defence system, modernising the Navy at the time where they had the time to do it. At the expense of the army, and it was unquestionably the right decision.
But also, appeasement can only work if backing it, arguably appeasement can only work if backing it is all right. Then we'll go to war, and appeasement. You know what I mean? Because it does have a suggestion of deterrent in it. That if we'll appease you up to a point, rather than give you everything, and you can't do that if you aren't actually preparing for war. And the shift that happens on Chamberlain's watch, the shift that happens in March 39 is, well, all right then, so be it. We'll prepare the cudgels. James, this has been the most amazing in-depth week. And I suppose we're going to have to do the Battle
It's been
of Britain.
fun, hasn't it? I've really enjoyed going back into it, to be perfectly honest, and looking at the details. And I'm starting to spend a lot of time reading around the mood in 1940 and 1939. And we've been talking about Molly Panther Downs and London War Notes, which are just fantastic.
Another time.
But it's been great to get back into this. It really has. And I think it'd be fun to do a bit more on the Battle of Britain.
Yep. And a huge thank you to Seb Cox, to Mike Nyberg, to who
Samuel.
else? Yeah, exactly. Pierre Samuel.
To Colonel Ingram.
The Colonel.
Yes, well done, Alistair.
And who else have we had on? Come on, is that everyone?
Mike Nyberg.
Steve Prince. Steve Prince, a couple of days.
Steve Prince is brilliant. God, that seems like a lifetime ago that we had.
Well, exactly. That's the point I made right at the start.
Yeah, I know. Well, I agree with you. I'm agreeing with you.
A huge thank you to our contributors, and thanks for listening, everyone. And I'm going to take a lie down in a dark room that doesn't have the Second World War in it for half an hour.
And then get back to the modelling.
Exactly. Cheerio, everyone.
Cheerio.